When a racist pilot pushes a millionaire black entrepreneur to far mid-flight, an unexpected disaster forces them both to face reality. What followed was a shocking twist that left everyone speechless. Mark Johnson sank into the buttery leather seat of the private jet, savoring the sense of accomplishment that came with years of relentless effort. At 38, he was the CEO of a thriving tech company, invited to speak at a prestigious Silicon Valley conference. This flight was supposed to be a brief moment of peace before a whirlwind of meetings. Yet, something about the day felt off. The cabin exuded luxury, with polished walnut accents and plush carpeting. Mark glanced at the two other passengers, an older woman engrossed in her phone and a man in his 50s reading a thick paperback. The faint sound of clinking glasses came from the kitchenette as the flight attendant prepared refreshments. Suddenly, a jolt interrupted Mark's thoughts. It wasn't turbulence, it was Greg Turner, the pilot, brushing past him aggressively. Confused, Mark looked up. He had only stood briefly to retrieve a folder from the overhead compartment. "Do you mind?" Greg barked sharply. "This isn't some commuter flight." "Stay seated." Taken aback, Mark blinked. "I was just grabbing my—" Greg cut him off. "This is a private jet. You're not the only person on board, you know." The words hung in the air like smoke. Mark's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to remain composed. He had dealt with men like Greg before, men who saw his success as a threat. Still, he reminded himself, this was just a flight. The older woman glanced up briefly before returning to her phone. Mark sat down, folder in hand, and watched Greg retreat to the cockpit, muttering under his breath. Though faint, Mark caught the words, "out of their lane." Mark exhaled slowly, gripping the armrest. He had learned to navigate such hostility, but it never got easier. Moments later, the flight attendant approached with a warm smile, offering him a drink. Her kindness was a balm, yet the tension lingered. What Mark didn't know was that this was only the beginning. A bigger storm was brewing, one that would test him in ways he couldn't have imagined. An hour into the flight, Mark decided to stretch his legs. As he passed the cockpit, the door swung open abruptly, nearly hitting him. "Are you trying to eavesdrop?" Greg's loud voice drew the attention of other passengers. Mark froze. "No, I was just—" "Stay away from the cockpit," Greg snapped, his narrowed eyes scanning Mark for trouble. "We have protocols for a reason." Mark's patience, already stretched thin, cracked. "With all due respect, I'm not near the controls. I'm just walking to the back of the plane." Greg scoffed. "You people always have excuses." The room seemed to hold its breath. The older woman looked up, her expression tense. The man with the book shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mark stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "I don't know what your problem is, but I suggest you keep it to yourself. I've done nothing to deserve your disrespect." Greg smirked. "I'm just doing my job. Maybe stick to yours, whatever that might be." The flight attendant intervened, her face flushed. "Mr. Turner, is everything okay?" "Fine," Greg muttered, retreating to the cockpit. The attendant turned to Mark with an apologetic look. "I'm so sorry, he's not usually like this." Mark gave a tight smile, brushing it off. Inside, frustration churned. This wasn't the first time he'd faced discrimination, but it never got easier. The plane jolted slightly, then harder, causing the oxygen masks to deploy. The intercom crackled as Greg's strained voice instructed passengers to remain calm. Mark's instincts told him the issue was mechanical, not atmospheric. Moments later, Greg stumbled out of the cockpit, his face drenched in sweat. "Can anyone here fly a plane?" he blurted, his voice cracking. Mark stood, his towering frame steady. "I can." Greg stared at him, disbelief etched on his face. "You, don't be ridiculous. I'm a licensed pilot. Do you want my help or not?" Another jolt sent Greg stumbling into his seat. He didn't answer, but his silence was an unspoken surrender. Mark entered the cockpit, scanning the chaotic dashboard. Years of training kicked in as he adjusted the controls and stabilized the plane. Behind him, Greg watched in stunned silence. "You're really a pilot?" he finally asked. Mark didn't look up. "Flight school. Got my license years ago. Greg muttered under his breath, didn't think someone like you. Mark cut him off. Someone like me just saved your passengers, your crew, and your plane. Remember that the next time you make assumptions. Under Mark's control, the plane landed smoothly at San Francisco International Airport. Passengers erupted into applause, their relief palpable. The older woman clasped Mark's hand. You were the real captain on this flight. Greg, meanwhile, slumped in a corner, his earlier bravado stripped away. Outside, he was immediately pulled aside for questioning by airline officials. Mark, ever composed, simply moved on. A journalist approached him, asking about the incident. Mark's response was measured. It's about the assumptions we make about people. Today, those assumptions almost cost lives. The airline issued an apology and announced Greg's termination. For Mark, the ordeal was a reminder of the strength and humility and the power of confronting prejudice with grace and determination. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Unfolded Tales Explained and press the bell icon to stay updated with our latest videos. See you next time.